Cheers. Thank you very much. And we had a discussion that earlier that this is very much about me having presentation. But I'm really happy if you have any comments or you get angry about something that I say. So just fill in. Just briefly to introduce myself, I'm Jakob Breme, and I'm a professor industrial economics and management. We just talked about that. It sounds a bit old, maybe. But we are doing research in the area of management and very much about business relationships, etc. And the issue that Nigel asked me to talk about is about business models. And we actually have a center here that is basically, we call it Center for Business Model Innovation. And the question then, this is the thing that I want to talk about here is that is this really a thing? Could you have a research topic that is business models, or what is that? How can you question that in one way or another? And I will talk a bit about that, but then I will also talk about my view and our way of working with business models, and whether or not we can regard this as a theory or if it's not a theory at all. So I hope that that might be a bit interesting. So just coming back to the issue of business models, and I think that the first time I heard about this was when I was, in the late 90s. I was actually involved in the dot-com era. I was part of something. I had some friends who worked in industry. I was at the university, and they wanted me to be a part of a new project, starting up a new company. It's still running today, actually. It was in the construction industry. But it was basically a trade or e-commerce type of solution. That was the first time I've heard about that. I was involved. I had presentations, and we met people from George Soros funds. It was like a crazy time. And the thing in Sweden, we're a small country. I mean, like there's a lot more going on in the UK, but we were one of the countries that was like almost like forerunners in this field. So it's a lot of money coming into Sweden when it came to e-commerce. And the thing for me, why business models then came into play, was basically that there was something that needed to be explained about business models, because no one had anything. There was nothing there. So all of a sudden, business models became something that you referred to, and you had to do that with investors. I think that one of the most common way to look at this is being what is referred to as the canvas, and I will come back to this a bit. I'm not so keen about this, but this is something that's been used quite a bit by consultants. It's been used by. Am I in the picture, or am I? It's tricky to see. Yeah, but it has been used quite a bit. So again,
for me, the slide is very small and to the left. Is that your intention?
No. Oh yeah. That's my intention. So sorry. Yeah, that's my intention. So it's like, the business model canvas has been, a tool for people, and that was developed by a guy called Osterwalder when he did his PhD project, a Dutch guy. And I'm all for this, but still, it is for me a very, very static type of descriptive tool to define what you are doing. We are looking at this from a value perspective instead. So basically looking at business models to try for development, and we look at this from 3 different perspectives, and we're not the only ones who are doing this, but still we're looking at it from a value offering perspective. We're working on it from a value creation perspective, and we are working on it from a value sharing perspective. So when I said this was basically originally a way to describe new dot-com startups in around 99, and I saw it first then. And it was, as I saw it, a way to explain what you were supposed to do in the future. So basically explaining a business before you had any business. And it's very much about trying to persuade investors to part of their money for something that wasn't really there. So everyone was trying to build something, and it didn't have anything. So then the issue of business models, and I think that one of the big issues here in terms of business model was also in terms of trying to understand how you would actually make money from your idea. So that's also something that I see quite a bit in reference to business models, is that it's also about, for some people, it's basically just about how do you earn money and how are people supposed to pay for your services or your e-commerce solution, whatever it is. And this, I mean, like in terms of business models, that was like very much during a time of an extreme hype, and for the investors, for the guys, we were looking. I mean, like I had some friends and old colleagues, and we were looking around and said, "Shit, they're going to invest now like 70 million pounds or something like that," and we know there's nothing behind this, but that's how it was. So it was an extreme hype. It was, but interesting, really. I can also there might be some similarities to the AI boom now in 2025, but I'm not sure. So this is my starting point about this. But and one of the starting points we also have in terms of business models is that we view this from a value perspective. So it's basically, what are we offering that creates value? How are we producing this value? And how do we share the value? And I think that when you're looking at the traditional, business canvas modeling and stuff like that, that is used quite a bit in practice. It's much more about different, trying to define what you're actually doing. And it becomes quite descriptive in terms of that. So, but it's used, and it's used quite a bit. And it's used, the business model, it's used in management, operations, industrial economics, as we talked about. And it's also used by business managers. It is used by politicians, and it's even coming into like legal stuff. When we're looking at the directive coming from the EU now, so you don't have to worry about this. But it's the CSRD, for instance, that you've heard about. And then they're talking about double materiality, which is basically how you as a company impact the environment or society, and how society or the environment impact you as a company. But they refer to it as a business model. So they refer to it in their directives as how does the business model impact environment, and how does the environment impact your business model. And but there's basically, for me, there's very little consensus of what we actually mean by a business model. And even though it's used quite a bit, we are looking at it from like, how do you create, how you deliver, or how you capture value, or we are talking about it in terms of deliver. We're talking about it more in terms of offering. And I would also say that there has been a bit of a debate, and I will come back to that. Could this be viewed as a theory? And for us, I think we are not using it at all as a theory, but it's more in terms of like a conceptual framework or analytical tool. And I also think that when you talking about it sometimes in terms of startups, and you're talking about it also in terms of business managers, etc. It's quite related also to business strategy, but the limitations between them are not so clear. If I would say something, it would be it's not only your strategy, but it's also how you're supposed to fulfill your strategy. But it's quite vague. Even the guys, like the guy I talked about, the Osterwalder, they talk about this as a conceptual tool, and also others, it's like it's interrelated building blocks or something like that. And we can see that also in Amit and Sot, or the guys, they have been talking quite a bit about business models, and we see this. They see it as like an interdependent activity system, and that's some like spanning firm boundaries. And the other one is also that you have some kind of component-based view, that you define, or you break down the business model into components, and that could include in industrial context, customer segments, etc. And then you go into different areas when it comes to that. So if it's not a theory, so what type of theories do we see in relation to business model type of research? And I would say that there are a number of them. It's a strategic management and innovation and entrepreneurship are two areas where the business model innovation type, for instance, business model innovation, then innovation entrepreneurship becomes something of an entrepreneurial thing, and that's something that's grounded on that as well. But you also see it in terms of transaction cost economics, very much about what should you do within your firm, or what make or buy decisions and governance issues. One thing that we are working quite a bit about is to look at this in terms of resources. So it's very much about resource-based view, but also very much about resource dependency, to look at this from a supply chain management point of view, or value chain. And I think that is something that is very much. And I will come back to a bit about how we view the different components, and in terms of different types of studies. So we would argue that if we're looking at business models, so it's more of a conceptual way to describe either changes or how you're working with different things. So it's very much a business model. We look at it as based on different elements, and then you're then shaped by corresponding theoretical concepts depending on what type of issues at hand. I don't know if that makes sense for you all, but still. So for us, it's very much, it's more of a conceptual or a descriptive type of framework, and that it serves as a map of like key components and not a theory in itself. I know that there are some people who are debating about this, to see this as something that could be part of a theory building, but it's not. It's much more of a descriptive type of thing, rather than trying to explain why things happen. So for me, it's much more of a descriptive type of framework, or different types of elements that's joined together in terms of this. So what I feel is that when you're working on business models, it's much more fruitful to look at this from an established theory perspective, and then you come into the play of trying to understand what would that mean. Why is then business model a suitable way to look at this at all? But this is how we look at it. It's basically a business model for us, describes how organizations offer, how they produce, and how they capture or share value. And that is the center of how we look at business models. That's more of a broad type of thinking than I would say like a lot of the other descriptive type of frameworks. So that for us, that's it. So in terms of the value proposition, how you offer this, it's the products and services. How do you see this? How they create value for users? That's one of a big thing in terms of this. And then you can see in terms of studies, that could mean that you're looking at servitization. You could look at value-based or functional procurement. You can also look at this from like an innovation perspective, as I said before. So that means that if you're looking at value offerings, that could be viewed from completely different angles. And that's, the value offering becomes like a research topic in its own right. It could even be called like servitization, or it could be functional procurement, could be the focus area. The other part is basically value creation or value production, as we see it. And then we look at it from like a value network perspective, or sometimes it's called like ecosystems and stuff like that. But it's basically, if you're looking at it from a perspective, the value offering is what we are offering. The next question is then, how should we produce this? And then what comes into play is supply chain management theories, how you handle relationships and networks, how you manage different resources, operations management, but also organizational theories come into play when it comes to how do you produce this. And the last part then is basically how you capture or share value. And that's very much how value can be appropriated or shared between the actors. That's how we view it. And then you come into studies such as, how do you appropriate value in the supply chain? How do you look at this from like a resource dependency perspective, issues such as financing, stakeholder theory, and we're looking at issues such as spillover impacts now, etc. In Sweden, it's quite common that we have a large portion of our research is done from external funding. So we have to make research applications, and that's a big nightmare for us. We have to write repetitive research applications. It's a lot of work in doing that. And we had quite a big application out, and then we said that what we're supposed to do, and they came back and said, yeah, but shouldn't you work on business models? So sometimes it's even coming from the industry or the funders themselves, that they are interested in business models, although they don't know what business models are. But this is the way we look at it. And one of the rationale also is that what we see here now is that there is a driver for change, and there's a lot of different issues that is happening at the moment. So obviously, the digital landscape is something that we see that's actually driving change for business models. But the big thing that I'm working on more is basically that you have a lot of sustainability issues, which is coming from legislation, but it's also coming from market demands. And what we're also seeing, not least, in terms of the West and the East, etc., it's a lot in terms of geopolitics and new stakeholder requirements. And this has a huge impact on future business models. That's basically our hypothesis anyway. And but that doesn't necessarily translate into having a big business model research, because still we have to do research about the different components, like the value offering or the value creation, and then we have to focus on that for a while. So it's it's quite a big thing. But what we do though find is that if you take it down to the different components or for the different parts in a business models, there's also quite a big push in terms of understanding how this work as a system. So it's not only about new being good in research in terms of the different components, but there's value in its own right to put that together for a company, because this is a bit like we see it as well, and that is that we have the three different starting points that you can look at the business model. So if you have like a value offering starting point, or what we refer to as a purpose-driven starting point, so then it's very much about looking at what is the desired offering. So it's basically we're starting off on what we actually want to offer to the economy. I had a friend, and she's been doing a lot of work with startups, and she said that maybe 95% of the startup companies, they've got something, they are starting from a purpose-driven starting point, basically looking at sustainability as one of the big issues that they want to change. And we've had in Sweden, we've had a company that's just gone bust and was bought by, I can't remember what they called it, Lyft or something like that. Lift, I don't know. But it was called Northvolt, and their purpose-driven starting point was to manufacture sustainable batteries, so for vehicles, etc. And so that was their purpose-driven starting point. The next part in that is for someone who has this part, is that it requires resources, it requires value creation, and it also, you have to also take care of how you're supposed to share the value. So companies such as Northvolt or even Tesla had a purpose-driven starting point. And the question then is, how successful are you in terms of your value production? And I think that is where a company such as Northvolt, if you've heard of them, they actually failed. And it was basically in the value creation. So even though you've got a really good idea in terms of what you want to provide and what you want to have as a value offering, it's not necessarily so that you could actually make that happen, because you need to be able to take care of your value creation as well. Established companies, they are more, as we see, more often than not, starting off like from a resource-driven starting point. Their value offering is more often than not already defined. So what they're working on is much more about their resource base. So then it comes into play, how do you do this in a sustainable fashion, for instance? How do you make this really resilient, which is I think that the popular word nowadays, resilience, is a big thing in terms of being able to work on this thing about value in terms of value creation. But you have to start from the existing value chain and then basically look at how you want to develop that. Not many of these companies are redefining their value offering. Instead, they are focusing on maybe trying to redefine their resources instead in their existing value chain. The third part is basically some kind of stakeholder driven starting point, and you don't have as many companies as that in terms of this, but we do have a number of companies that has a starting point where they're actually looking at how value can be distributed among stakeholders in a different way. And I think that the most common examples, though, is very much the American idea about that you have to do a charitable contribution to society or something like that. we worked with a company, and they had their starting point was basically we are always supposed to, for charitable causes, we always have to share 20% of our turnover, not of our profits, their turnover. It's like we couldn't believe what they were saying, but that was their starting point. And then you have to ask yourself, how can you produce this value in order to reach those goals if you have that starting point? And also, what type of offering should you have in terms of this? So this is a way to look at this, that you are looking at it from what are the starting points for a business or for even within a value chain, and where are you supposed to start in terms of your business model. But when that has been said and done, you also have to think about that one of these will impact the other. So it's part of a system, how you can think. So this is basically what we're working on now. And the basic idea what we had when we did our research bid and got money for doing research in this area is that we also are looking at how companies or in different sectors can challenge how they're actually looking at this. So it's basically challenge what your existing product, services, and system. What would you like to have? Or can we question the current value proposition? And understand different types of customer value? And this is also something that we have been looking at from a procurement perspective. What is it that you want to procure? And what type of issues do you want to, in what way do you want this offering to be constructed? Because this is something that you have to do together between buyer and seller, at least if there's bigger projects that you're working on. The other one is basically how can and should the future business ecosystems be organized, and basically challenge how the current value chain is structured or how your supply chain is structured. And that means also that you have to question the relationships you have, and basically also start to ask if you need to identify new necessary partners and resources. For large companies, this is a big issue, and they are a bit reluctant in terms of doing this, and they also testify to this. And if they want to do have other types of value offerings, they might need to be able to also challenge how their current value chain is structured. And I talked to one of he was then CEO of a company called the ABB in Sweden, and he said that it's not in our psyche to actually include, for instance, small startups which are really technically advanced, because we are so used to doing it in-house. So inviting them to our value chain or business ecosystems is a challenge for us. And the last part then is basically looking at this from how value is created and how value is shared, and can we challenge that? Yeah, sorry.
Yes, I am.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. Did you have a question?
Yes,
or
it's for
comment?
the driving lesson.
Hey, Jacob, you can
somebody
continue. I'll
should
just
mute.
mute the person. Yeah.
Sorry.
Yes, please.
Yes.
I thought it was.
I need some kind of the instructor.
Is that okay? I don't know if I was wrong. Sorry about that. I need to. What I'm working on quite a bit at the moment is basically. Oops, sorry. I'm a bit confused now. What I'm working mostly on now is basically looking at value, how existing value processes are, how can you look at the future business ecosystem? And that also has to do with the popular term resilience. It also has to do with the issue of supply chain management, and also in terms of relationships. So this is something that so that is a focus area within the business model that I'm working on quite a bit. And what a lot of companies are working on now, and I think that that's something that goes throughout the Western world. We're looking at it from, the US tariffs, the Russian invasion of Ukraine, crisis in the Middle East. There's so much more uncertainty at stake now. So it's a lot of issues that comes into play in terms of how can you look at your supply chain? Can we question how we're doing business? What are our value chains? And everyone in one way or another has to do this. So if we're going back a bit, not so many people were questioning global value chains, but now something is really happening. And we do a lot of research when it comes to companies, and this is one of the big issues. So if you go back in time, not many people questioned this. You had like a risk management thing that basically no one looked at. It's just going through the motions. Whereas now this is something that's up on the business management agenda, but also in terms of boards. So questioning business partners, looking at how your supply chains should they be restructured? Do we need to invest in own production capacity? Are we going more on terms of regions to reduce dependencies? And issues like this. And what we also see is that resilience is connected very much to sustainability. So when we're looking at this in terms of the business models, it is still in established large corporations. What we're seeing is basically something that is a development that has made this into a whole. So it's even I'm engaged in something called Corporate Sustainability Responsibility Sweden, and they're even talking about that the sustainability issue for now is basically resilience. So this is something that I see is happening quite a bit at the moment. So what we see now is that in terms of the business models, and that will have an impact on what we can offer, and maybe even in terms of innovations, that policy and world events is creating such much uncertainty that it impacts this fundamentally. So coming back into vogue is risk analysis and trying to understand scenario planning and understanding that there's differences between risk and uncertainty. And that is something that we see a lot of companies are working on. You can't react to all the uncertainty, but you can try to be prepared for the uncertainty. So, and that's something that we really see. And if we're looking at the tariffs, people are traveling the world trying to understand how should our future value chain and supply chain look like, and how can we make this more independent and long-term resilient. And that is something that's happening at the moment. For me, this is something that I find quite interesting. And if you're a bit interested in how companies react to uncertainties and how organization can adapt to these uncertainties and how they are working on these issues now, and if you're particularly interested in also in trying to understand supply chains, it's a field day, because now trying to understand the complete supply chain is basically something that a lot of the companies are struggling with, and especially if you're talking about multi-tier supply chains. Academically, it's also a matter of when we have been looking at this in the past, and I think that where supply chain management comes from has been a cost issue, and a lot of the global value chains have developed based on cost. But is that a question now that we are questioning the cost to be absolutely only focused on cost, and instead working on the redefining our well-tuned supply chains towards more regional, secure, whatever that might mean, supply chains? And basically what we might see in the future here is more regionalized supply chains, and that might also be a cost increase. People are even looking at this. Would that also impact inflation in the future? Another interesting academic issue is that for me, that has been working on business relationships, and that is, are we also seeing that we might have really good supplier or customer relationships that might not help in the future, because we might have really good contacts and really good relationships with for instance, a Chinese supplier, but because of tariffs, because of resilience issues when it comes to different types of rare earth metals, for instance, that doesn't help. You need to establish other types of relationships, or maybe even have a development of new or substitute materials or substitute products. And that's also one thing that is an interesting aspect in its own right. And that is, will this impact technology development or product material innovation for the future? So, and that might have a huge impact on both what the value offering that you have, but also in terms of maybe your value sharing, because it might be that you have to invest more technology development with different actors in your business ecosystem or your value chain. Okay, I think that was the time I had, so I managed to finish on time, I think. You can always say that you finish on time because you just threw out some slides, right?
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you. Any questions? I know I've got one. Barry.
Hi, everybody. Thank you, Jacob. Very interesting session. My name is Barry. I work with Nigel and Akansha and in the business school here. And thank you for that. You seem to be outlining one of the many paradoxes of these areas, that business model, for example, the canvas where we started, is both a practical approach as well as a theoretical approach. It feeds both areas, but you expanded it so effectively into other areas, which was very interesting to see. Are you suggesting that the conventional business model ideas need to be done away with and rethought?
I think for us it has been like this, that if you're looking at like the business model canvas, for us I think it's quite tricky to theorize about that. It becomes a list of customer segments, it becomes a list of activities you're doing, etc. And what does that provide us with in terms of theorizing? I'm not sure that works. So I think that we are not the only ones who are looking at business models in terms of these three. I think you can remember three as well. The other ones you tend to forget. The power of three. But I think that if we're looking at it from like a theoretical perspective and also talking about it in terms of innovation and development, I think we need to look at it from a different angle. But the question then is that the business model is still a framework for me, I think.
Okay. Thank you, Jacob. Thank you.
I don't know if I managed to answer your question.
No, that's fine. Thank you so
Yeah.
much.
Cheers.
Felix.
Hello. Thank you very much for that. The business model canvas, I really like it. It's a good tool to use to, analyze your current states of provision. But some sectors are quite very volatile, changing needs over time and all of that. Can you please just relate the business model canvas and dynamic capabilities as to how we can measure that due to, like, for example, the social care sector, we have frequency policy changes, high demands, aging population. So it's quite very complex.
Yeah, I think you're quite right. I think that when it comes to the business model canvas, I think it's a bit too static. So, dynamic capabilities is something I find it very interesting. But then you're looking at the business model from a dynamic capabilities perspective. And should you do that from all these different types of details, or should you look at it from like a offering perspective or supply chain perspective, or what type of dynamic capabilities are you looking at? So I think that's a really good point, sensing, ceasing and stuff like that. That's what you're talking about, right?
Yeah, that's correct. So in that case, since the business model canvas can be a bit of a static tool, so will it be quite advisable? For example, an organization can have their business model map out as a tool, and then can also have the dynamic capability in one side, the ability to sense, size, and transform or reconfigure when required.
Absolutely. But we prefer to look at the business model in terms of the three different components: value offering, value creation, and value sharing. And I think what we do then is basically we cover the entire canvas, but we're not like, because it's very, very prescriptive, the canvas, I think. And it could be a good exercise for a company to understand what they're doing, but not so much in terms of dynamic capability in what they should be doing, how they have to transform, for instance. And then I think issues such as dynamic capability or other types of innovation issues, I think. One thing that we're studying in terms of business models now is spillover impacts. I don't know if anyone knows about this, but it's very much a microeconomics issue, spillover impacts or spillover effects from large high-tech projects, so public procurement, how does that be impacted of high-tech stuff. And that's just one part of the business model. So I think also you don't necessarily have to come back to the entire business model all the time. What you can do is basically, what type of impact would that have on our value offering, the spillover impacts. So in terms of you're looking at the value sharing part, you focus on that, and then you can look at what type of impact would that have on like value offering or your supply chain, for instance, as an example. But it would be in terms of the dynamic changes, I think. Yeah. Really good question. Sorry, Nigel.
I just before we started, we were talking, and you talked about the unity between the Baltic states and those countries that are on the edge of Russia about the need to improve defenses and rearm, etc., etc. And in your presentation, you talked about perhaps the growing need for regional trading blocks, regional supply chains at the expense of global supply chains. Would that be like at the level of Baltic, like a Baltic area, or at a European area, or?
I think when we're talking to companies now, I think they're looking at it from a regional perspective. So a lot of the companies that we are dealing with are Swedish multinational companies. So normally they have production in China, they have production in India, etc. What they are working on is basically making those more regional. So their supply chain shouldn't be global, because they got a factory in India. So then it should be a regional coverage of that factory. And I think what we're looking at in terms of Sweden, it's very much a European perspective we have. When we're talking about defense, for instance, the supply chain we're looking at in the defense industry, that's basically Germany and the UK. And we have that's been a very long tradition of having really tight connections with the supply chain in the UK. And so my answer to that is basically we are not looking at it. I don't think it's a regional. I think we're looking at it from a European perspective. But there has been some debate also that we need more, not even national. So it's like we're not even talking regional. So it's and I think that that's something that you're talking about in the UK as well, that we have maybe outsourced a bit too much of our production. And when it comes to capacity build-up, that could be a big problem. I don't know. Do you agree, Nigel?
Well, it strangely echoes in America, doesn't it? With "Make America Great Again."
Yeah.
Yeah. Chris?
Oh, you're on mute.
Sorry. Right. I just wanted to bring my hand down. Thanks. An interesting topic, very interesting. I think I'm particularly intrigued by the examples you are using to underpin your model. So I was hearing a lot, resilience, sustainability.
Yeah.
And the bit on cost optimization or economic growth, the finance bit, the money part, the bottom line part.
Yeah.
I'm just wondering, from what you are saying, in terms of, collaboration between academia and business and practice, that third and crucial part, I heard the bit about a company going bust. They came up with a good purpose, but then go bust. In my view, I think they were really trying to focus on the sustainability element. Now, is there any special considerations you are giving to the money bit, the revenue bit, the shareholder bit, the value bit in terms of, cash?
Yeah.
How does that conflict with trying to focus on purpose, i.e. sustainability, and also address the point or the issue of resilience?
Yeah, I think you have a strong point there. I think that when we're talking about sustainability and you're talking about, for instance, energy efficiency, because that's sustainable, but that also means more often than not, that also means that you're saving money. Then it's no-brainer. But if you're talking about issues that will actually raise costs, then it might be a bit trickier. So when we're looking at this in terms of, for instance, global value chains, are they getting to be more regionalized, and will that increase cost? We haven't seen so much about this yet, but everyone is basically working on it. So it is, and we haven't seen the full impact of the tariffs, for instance. We haven't seen that on businesses, but it also depends on what will happen in the future, because the news in terms of this is going really fast. If I can comment on the example I had on Northvolt, which was basically a company making batteries in the north of Sweden, and they also had factories in a bit in the south. They had in Germany, they had in Canada. I think they had something in the US as well. What they did was basically they got a lot of financing, and they promised also to make, to have these types of volumes. So they had to invest so much money in the production instead of getting one factory finished first. So they were burning so much capital. So that is a big issue for them. So even though you have a really good value offering idea, you didn't think about how you're going to finance this, and you actually couldn't really manage to get the cash flow going. for me, that was one of the big issues for them. So I think, in terms of following the money is a good perspective in its own right. And sometimes they are in contrast to, and I think that also in terms of the supply chains and to develop more resilient supply chains, that goes maybe against the grain as well in terms of cost, because you might have cost increases on that as well. I don't know if that was an answer to your question, but yeah.
Good. Thank you.
I'll take one last question. No hands up. Well, a lot of food for thought there. Thank you ever so much, Jakob. That was really what we wanted, and I think we're all going to think a bit more about business models and whether they're a good thing to research.
Yeah. Cheers. Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you, everybody, for coming. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.